I'm Coach Tarek.
And I'm Vanessa.
We are your movement experts, and we are here to educate health and fitness professionals with the tools to create real change for and within the industry. Hello, friends. I had a wonderful conversation with my good friend, movement and martial arts expert, Steve Cotter. He's always a pleasure to interview because he gives his heart, soul, energy, and he has an immense intellect in the field of physical education. In fact, this conversation really revolved around physical education is salvation. And what Steve has meant by this is that think of physical activity as education for the long haul. It's all about longevity. And one of the particular themes that you'll notice in this conversation is the whole thread of understanding skill acquisition. And skill acquisition, what Steve claims, actually transcends the typical fitness attributes. So think of attributes like your cardio, your strength, your power. Whilst these are all good things, learning a skill whilst you're doing movement practice is very essential. So put aside martial arts. I love martial arts, and Steve's an expert in it himself. It's the skill of something like throwing a kettlebell around and getting better and better at that. And the kettlebell acts as an extension to one's arm, for example, in various movements. So the whole notion of skill acquisition is that it forms longer-term retention of memory, and that also then transfers or translates into other recreational movements. So sit back and enjoy this fascinating conversation with Steve Cotter. We're here with Steve Cotter, who I've known for at least now since we first met in 2013, when I flew to San Diego with the then business partner, Dan Henderson, and had the privilege of a few days with you, learning the art and craft of kettlebells. And that was a tremendous time. And in fact, I remember picking up a DVD of yours, would you believe it? DVD back in 2006, all those years ago. And this highlights the great man himself as an early pioneer of kettlebells in the US. Really one of what I call the founding fathers of kettlebells, not only in the US, but in the West, really. And that speaks volumes of Steve. There's many great accolades and things to talk about about Steve. And I know that he's a very humble man and is a good friend of mine. So Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Tarek. Wonderful to be here with you and talk to you again after a long time. And thanks for everyone joining us today.
Yeah, it has been a little bit of time since we spoke, but we're always connected, and we're connected on a main point of purpose, which is about movement and the movement journey, and particularly that it is a journey really rather than kind of thinking about a short-term fix. That's going to be really the ethos of this. And again, we'll get Steve to focus primarily on this topic, which is physical education is salvation. So tell me a little bit about the idea of physical activity is salvation, and sort of how that ties into who you are and your philosophy, Steve.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And so I reflect upon an adage, or we could say a cliche, that is often associated with the martial arts. We have probably all heard the term mind, body, and spirit as a way to sort of summarize the various components of the human existence. And as I've reflected upon the mind, body, and spirit, what I've personally done in my communication with this concept is I've tried to make sense of what are these components of the human. And so what I say actually is mind, body, and breath. And I feel what I call the holy trinity of mind, body, and breath. And that's quite because if we speak about spirit, it has a very broad interpretation, and it can really mean different things to different people. Is spirit, is it an energy? Is it a God? You know, can we touch it? Can we feel it? So it's very ambiguous when we talk about something like spirit, because it doesn't have a sensory component where we can't see, touch, taste, or smell, or look at it or hear it. And so instead of speaking about spirit, I speak about the breath. And so now we know exactly what we're talking about. The breath, the inspiration is to breathe in. And so this idea of this all-encompassing trinity, which embodies the human experience of mind, body, and breath, we know what the body is. And the body is the most substantial. Body is the thing that we are familiar with at all times, exists. We are embodied within the body. And so we know what the body is. And when we speak about the mind, we all can have a very good sense of what that entails. Is it brain? Well, it may include the brain, but we speak really about consciousness and awareness. So we have a very strong sense of what the body is. We have a good sense of the mind. And then we have clear awareness of what the breath is. And so with this idea of the mind, body, and breath, it's a way to harmonize physical, which is the body, with the awareness and consciousness, which is the mind. And the breath is really the connection between the consciousness or the mind and the physicality or the body. So when I say that physical education is the salvation, it is the body which is the fastest possibility of facilitating or manifesting change within the individual. So for example, if someone is feeling depressed, they can stand up, they can maybe do some jumping jacks, or they can do some push-ups, or they can do some squats. And immediately, within a very short period of time, you're creating circulation. The blood is moving, and you're stimulating hormonal response, and it's going to almost immediately change the state. And so, as the focus of education, I believe that physical education is the most important form of education. The reason for that is because we have a lot of times when the idea of education is considered, we normally think about perhaps university education or professional education, where someone is going to school and they're training their brain, they're training their intelligence to learn some skills. However, someone who is extremely intelligent and extremely educated, but does not have physical awareness and physical capacity, they are not comprehensively educated. And I consider that person potentially very dangerous. We have very smart people that have no concept about the body. And, we're in a time where there's an integration of man and machine, where there's a lot of uncertainty about the direction that the world is going with the proliferation of AI technology and computation and the rapid development of these modalities. There's this potential where the machine is basically catching up to the man, and we don't know what's on the other side of that, what could be called the point of no return. And so is the machine going to surpass the man to where now the man becomes enslaved by the machine, for example? Now, we don't know, but this is a topic of conversation.
On that note, Steve, so do you think it's a problem of convenience where, as a culture, we've just embraced this concept of convenience to really make things easier? So everything becomes an effort. It becomes an effort to walk up those stairs. It becomes an effort to, pick up your luggage. All of these things that kind of the net effect is essentially movement is being substituted for the sake of convenience. And I allude to the idea that in philosophy back at university days, I learned about the vat in the machine, right? So it's this whole concept that's essentially or potentially where we could head without that awareness. So talk to me a little bit about that, if you don't mind, and sharing with the audience this idea of, do you feel like it's a problem of convenience?
Yes, yes. Personally, I believe balance. I believe in balance. I believe in seeking a balance. For example, our ancestors from a few generations ago, they were prior to the industrial age. So, in the Western world, the industrial age has been less than 200 years. So it's really only been in relatively recent human history. If we consider human history exists with what is being discovered through the carbon dating technologies. There's rapid understanding and uncovering, more and more artifacts, and the paleontologists are finding that the hominid of which we descend, the human sapien, we've existed for at least 100,000 or 200,000 years roaming the earth. And yet, the lifestyle that we are living is extremely different from the lifestyle of our ancestors from even, 100 years ago. And so, I'm not someone that believes that we can go back in time, and I don't seek, I don't think that it's better to sleep on maybe the dirt floor. I prefer to have a bed. I prefer to have a home with a roof. I drive a car. I go to the market and I'm able to source food without having to necessarily grow the food or pick the food myself. So these are conveniences that we're all benefiting from. However, there needs to be an element of discomfort in life in order to grow. We do not grow from too much comfort. And as you mentioned, the convenience, when there's too much convenience, there's too much comfort. And while comfort feels good, comfort also creates complacency. And so we need to be able to also experience discomfort, which is challenges, which is difficulties. And I'm of mind that we need to seek out positions of discomfort in our life because we exist in a world where there's so many creature comforts, so many modern conveniences that if we get sucked into that, we have a generation of young people, for example, that are essentially existing on the digital platforms, and they're spending all of their time, on the, on their tablets or on their phones, and we're all participating in that. However, I remember I'll be 54 in January, so I remember when I was a young kid growing up, those things didn't exist, right? And so what I did for fun, I was the youngest of 5 children, is I would go outside and I would climb trees. And I would go in my backyard and I would be spending, hours in the tree, and I would pretending like I was the commander of the Starship Enterprise, and but or I would hike through the woods, or I would throw rocks in the stream, or or I would ride my bike, and then you came in when you hear the dinner bell. It's like, be back for dinner, and again, we can't undo or go back in time, but it's amazing how rapidly civilization has changed in a relatively very short period of time, to where we do have a generation now where they're not experiencing physical education at all. If we look at the public schooling now, certainly will differ in different parts of the world. I can't speak to the global process, but certainly in the United States, where I'm based, you see that funding is often cut first from the PE, or from the physical education. And so you have many schools where there really isn't gym class anymore. They may have recess for 15 or 20 minutes or 30 minutes, but there's no structured physical education. And, as a result, we're having children that, if they're not participating in some sport, which is sort of auxiliary, something that their parents invest in where they can play, whether it's, football or some other sport. For those children that don't have that, potentially they're not getting any exercise at all anymore. They're in front of the television. They're sitting in the car. They're sitting at the desk. They're sitting at the table, and we're seeing young people growing old very quickly because they're not utilizing their body. They're not expressing their physicality due to the environment that they're growing in. And that's exasperated when you're in an urban environment, which is, more and more people. If you look at the population of the world, I don't know exactly what the percentages are, but more than 60% of humanity lives in urban centers nowadays. So, concrete jungle, if you will. They're not having the opportunity to run around barefoot on the grass or to climb trees or to throw rocks or these types of things. And I think that's very harmful. I think it's very dangerous for the future of humanity, because it creates physically incapable citizens, and so when I say physical education is the salvation, we are physical. The human history comes from a very physical story. If you go back to the early origins of man, there was a prehistory where humans hadn't discovered fire yet. At some point in history, humans discovered fire. And, with that fire, they realized they could burn the stick with the fire. And then with that burned stick, you had the charcoal, and now you have essentially the number 2 pencil. And then after that, later humans determined that they could make parchment out of brush and out of trees. They could essentially the early forms of paper, and they could take the stick from the fire and they could write on the paper, right? And now that gave us the ability as humans to spread the written word, where I can write something on paper and now I can run or travel with that, and I can pass that and bring it to someone else. And, this populated the education. And we had very primitive technology, the early technologies. We had the fire, we had the stone, we had the rope, we had the stick. Early humans always had sticks, right? It was a part of their survival skills. You needed the stick to maybe defend yourself. You needed the stick to dig into the earth, maybe to carve a message, or maybe to scourge the food. And, here we are now, we have the iPhone, right? And so things have, really accelerated to where we're so detached from primitive. And, but having said that, the physical self has not changed at all in thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. We're physically the same as we have been. And yet the way that we are living, the lifestyle we are living, is drastically different. And we have not adapted physically at the same rate that we have adapted technologically.
Steve, going back when you were a child, climbing that tree and, foraging the woods, if you like, what were you honing? Tell us about the honing of the skill that was going on, because I think this kind of relates now to how specifically we can kind of put to the fore physical education as salvation, because I think that's tantamount to kind of how sophistication has evolved. And yes, we're seeing different levels of sophistication with, wearable technologies and, monitoring our vitals, and all of this sort of even virtual interaction, can be a good thing. But again, it can be almost an excuse to kind of say, well, I can't do this because it's too difficult, right? So if we go back to the bare basics, when you were climbing that tree, tell us a little bit about what was going on as far as honing a skill, and how that honing of that skill kind of allowed you to become more physically capable, but more confident perhaps, and other elements attributed to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the physical capacity to, to pull your body and developing the grip and developing the dexterity and the physical capacity and the coordination of, maneuvering yourself up through this path to get to the top of the tree. Those are physical development, but there's also psychosocial components where your decision making, and there's independence. There's independence and there's creativity in this idea, because, you never climb the same tree twice. You never climb the same tree the same way twice. You go up a different path, a different nook, a different cranny. And so this ability to play, it's crucial to not only our physical development, but to our social development, to our intellectual and our emotional development, because of the importance of creativity, the importance of independence and decision making. And, that definitely has guided me and did guide me through my early years of spending a lot of time by myself, being the youngest of 5, and, older brothers already away at college, and had a sister 5 years older, but at that age, I wasn't, hanging out with my sister. I was picking fights with her, and climbing the roof, jumping off the roof, these type of things, going through the fields, picking strawberries, going through the woods, this type of thing, swimming in the rivers. And so, yeah, the ability to play and to explore in an environment that, I guess by today's standard, very, very safe. There's no such thing as security, really. It's kind of a concept, but there's always the potential for danger always exists. But we didn't have, I think a lot of it is the media and the proliferation of the media and the ease of access that we have to media, where there's this potentially the perception that the world is extremely violent and extremely dangerous, and all we have to do is look on Twitter or look on YouTube and see these crazy videos of people being violent, people being attacked. And, that can, especially for a young person, it's very impressionable. That can create the perception that, it's dangerous to leave your house. And I don't think it's that bad, but generally speaking, when I was growing up as a young boy in the 1970s, we didn't have these types of concerns. Parents would send you outside to play, and there wasn't concern about, oh, you're going to be kidnapped or you're going to be, abducted or something like that.
And that ties back into the awareness component, right? So you obviously got the mind, and it ties into this sort of, I suppose, bodily transformation insofar as getting stronger, climbing that tree, the mountain, whatever it may be, also sharpens the mind to be more privy to potential actual dangers, but also to have that foresight then to kind of go, well, I get a sense now to kind of not go deep into that jungle. Or so can you talk a little bit about that and how that ties in, the honing in of greater levels of awareness, and how that unfortunately is missing because of this perceived degree of threat, right? That's been promulgated, if you like, by media and just in society in general, right? But stay away. Well, where's the actual threat?
We live in a civilization where I believe that there's excessive stimulation in general. Too much information, too much access, too much noise. And unless we intentionally separate ourselves from that, which is a very good practice to do, at least periodically, this stimulation in the form of technology, whether it's, the radio always playing, or the TV always on, or the phone always on, or the computer always on, and this rapid transfer of electronic information that is faster than what the eye can see and faster than what the conscious mind can process. So it's really impacting us subconsciously. It clouds the intuition. And, the intuition is a component of the human where, I guess we can say in simpler times, or if you're in maybe a more rural environment where you have more access to a natural environment, you're outside more, you're around the trees and the plants and the animals more, you're going to be more sensitive to your intuitive self. And the intuitive self gives us a lot of information, the feeling like, oh, maybe I shouldn't go that way. I shouldn't go left. I'm going to go right. Something doesn't feel right. And it's not necessarily a conscious awareness, but it's a sensation that comes from within. And we don't speak about or teach about the intuition in our society. Our children are taught about their intuition too much in our curriculums.
What's arguably the forgotten piece of the mind, right? Like, as you said, the mind, you have a certain, the brain, the logical levels, but actually we transcend that, for example, through imagination, right? Just as Einstein said, right? Getting from A to B is very logical, but going beyond that is imagination is required. So it's interesting, isn't it, that intuition and all these other higher elements seem to, because they can't really be quantified, right? Even though with paranormal activity now is becoming a lot more understood at least a scientific level, yet the media still downplays it. And you might hear it in a movie where, no, that there's no science to it, but actually, in actual fact, there is. So that paranormal activity really is our inner power, right? So just as we're thinking technology and AI can get greater, actually, we haven't really tapped into, let's call it, nowhere near as much as we actually have the abilities to, right? So we have this inner technology that is either suppressed because it's not really favored or taught in this logical system, or obviously the promulgation of the fear, right? So it's interesting to kind of note that, because you talked about the mind being more than the brain. And I think elements of the mind include intuition. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I believe so. There's the idea of that we have four brains. Some will say that we have four brains. And so we have the brain in our head, which is the brain we normally think about when we speak about the brain. That's our conscious, that's our intellect, that's our cognition. It enables us to, it involves language, it involves computation, mathematics, can do calculations, we can formulate creative ideas. So we have this brain. We also have the brain of the heart. And so traditional societies, they considered the center of the brain here, not here. And so they gave more credence to the heart and the feeling than they did to the thinking. We also can consider the gut one of the brains. So the third brain is the gut. So it's the digestive intelligence, how we respond to foods, how we process, how we assimilate foods, how we digest. And then in more recent times, we've come to understand more about the fascia system. So we can say that the fascia is the fourth brain. The fascia is the network which sort of synchronizes and links everything together within the body. It has to do with movement, kinesthetic awareness. So where that intuition is coming from, I don't know. I think it's part of our innate intelligence, whether it's coming from this brain, or whether it's coming from this brain, or whether it's coming from the brain of the fascia. I'm not sure. But maybe we will learn more in time.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to talk on the point of excessive stimulation, and specifically a question from your perspective is, how does physical activity help to organize the amount of stimulus or to kind of redirect into a point of focus? Can you talk a little bit about how physical activity can help with those of us who are overstimulated.
Yes, absolutely. And to be clear, I put great value in education. I think education is extremely important. I respect everyone who pursues education. However, the traditional model of education says that we're supposed to follow a particular process. Like you go to school, then you go to university, then you go to, postgraduate, master, PhD, and that's sort of the traditional model of education. What I believe is that self-education is the most profound method of education. So in my case, for example, I'm constantly throughout the day when I'm not in conversation or if I'm not spending time with someone, if I'm just by myself, I'm always listening to books. I don't watch television. I don't watch podcasts, except for this one, and a couple of, people that I really like, but generally speaking, I'm just listening to audiobooks, and it can be on all types of subjects. I love history. I love philosophy. I love studying about religion, but I also, love studying about things that I know nothing about, biomedical physics and so on. So I'm constantly consuming information throughout the day. And that's part of, the self-education. To your question about the physical component, when we are, we call it exercising. Most people would call it exercising or fitness. I call it training. Okay, so there, again, it's tomato on some degree, but it's also a way of looking at things. I consider training differentiating from exercise, and the primary differential is that training is to develop a particular skill. And so all the training that I do is skill-based training. In other words, if it doesn't develop some useful skill, it has no place in my curriculum, whatever that skill may be. Now, from an athletic perspective, that might mean it's going to help me lift more reps, or it's going to help me jump higher, or it's going to help me run faster. Now in my my 50s and what I'm into jujitsu. I love jujitsu. I'm training jujitsu every day. So for me, I look at training as, is this going to benefit me? Is it going to benefit my jujitsu in some capacity? But it can be anything. It can be training for a sport. It can be training for some aesthetic, if that's what you're interested in. It can be training for, some particular event that you want to, prepare for. Maybe someone's getting ready for a wedding and they want to look a certain way. So again, that's more of an aesthetic component. Not one is better than the other. It's a very individualized component. However, when we are in the training process, there's nothing else going on. And you and I, have very similar interests, and we followed, similar paths in terms of our expertise of, you also being one of the pioneers in kettlebell and spreading kettlebells and, functional fitness, handheld tools, and that's kind of the flavors that I've gravitated towards, that you gravitated towards. In earlier eras, bodybuilding was sort of the main thing where people were like, okay, we're doing curls for the girls, or, whatever the case may be. But the training process itself, you're not watching television. You're not thinking about something else. You're not, checking your email or your social media. You're focusing on your breathing. You're focusing on your posture. You're focusing on the movement and the quality. At least, someone who is well educated in it, they're going to focus on the quality of every single repetition. And in that process, you are 100% present. And this is, again, ties into why I say physical education is the salvation, because it is the one place where we are completely holistic in our presence. Our mind, our body, and our breath is all synchronized and working towards that common objective, which is the performance of the execution of the skill.
We'll call it present moment awareness. And I'm a big advocate of this, as you know, too. I preach and teach it and do it myself. And I know that when my mind does wander in the past, when that's when I've got my injuries, right? Like my mind's been totally off because I'm thinking about something in the past or in the future. But all of a sudden, that bad technique with a heavy lift, bang, it's game over. So talk a little bit more about, if you may, to the audience, the listeners, about the importance of this present moment awareness and how it ties into your point of more skill versus just attributes of training.
My awareness and my experience, what's led me to where I am, is that skill is the most important component of training. And there has to be a skill component to what you're doing. And how that ties to the presence is essentially the mind, or the mental focus, your focus of your energy. The mind is what is focusing your energy towards the objective. And so when we are dissipating, part of our power is going in some other direction outside of the task at hand. In that case, if you go into, say, your workout and you're really distracted, or you're thinking about something else, it's probably best to put the weight down, or put the kettlebell down, or put the, whatever form of training you're doing, put that aside and kind of, maybe do some deep breathing, clarify, clear your mind, and then, go back to it when you can really put your attention into what you're doing. I believe one perfect rep is worth more than 1,000 sloppy reps. So it's not practice makes perfect. It's perfect practice makes perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect execution.
Not just about the output, about the output. It's the quality of that output, I think, is important. And what I do want to clear up, though, to listeners is what you mean by attributes, like your strength and endurance and those qualities of fitness. Yeah, I want to confirm the difference between skill and attributes.
Right, absolutely. So attributes are important, and they contribute. So if we're looking at an athlete, the attributes are going to play a role in the performance and in the success. And that will vary to different sports. Certain sports, the attributes have a bigger impact. Other sports, the skill will have a much bigger impact. For example, I would say something like, if you're talking about American football, attributes go a long way. If the guy's 320 pounds and, he's 6'6", and, he can run really fast, you can turn that guy into a lineman. You can turn him into a football player. And, even if he hasn't developed skills, you can put him there and he's going to develop the skills based. The attributes put him in the position where he can play the sport. Whereas you may have, another athlete who is more skillful in terms of the techniques and the footwork and the hand positioning and knowing where to be on the field, but maybe they're only 180 pounds and they're 5'8". They don't have the attributes, even though they have skill. So they're not going to. But you take another sport like jiu-jitsu, it's completely opposite. Jiu-jitsu, you can have someone who's, can bench press 400 pounds, can squat 600 pounds, and is fast, is strong, is, aggressive. But if he doesn't have the technique, the smaller, weaker, more skillful person is going to beat that larger, stronger, more athletic person. And that happens all the time in a sport like jiu-jitsu. So, so the fundamental difference is the attributes are like the physical characteristics that we would consider objectives of training. So, for example, your maximal force development, your speed, your coordination, your balance, accuracy. right? These are examples of attributes that can be developed through training. Skill is the sport specificity of the game that you're playing. And so, just because you have a strong arm and you can, shoulder press heavy weight, it doesn't mean that that strong arm is going to make you a professional baseball pitcher who also has a strong arm, right? But that pitcher probably can't press as much as you, but he can pitch much better because that's a skill. And the skill is more of there's a neuromuscular component, the neural patterning where they're learning how to activate body along the kinetic chain in a precise sequence to create the output. That's the skill acquisition, or that's the skill expression of skill. The attribute of the things we develop in the gym, the skill is the thing that you develop in the practice of the sport itself.
Beautiful. Thank you for the summary. Now we're kind of edging. We've covered so much terrain here, and in the show notes we'll have a breakdown of all of the key discussion items, of course, as well as following Steve Cotter on Instagram, and there'll be links there. However, I do want to ask you this question that I ask all guests. If you could change one thing about the health, fitness, medical industry, right, today, what would it be from your perspective?
We have to move away from a disease model into a health model. And so the assumption is that someone is sick. The assumption is that there's something wrong with the person, that they come to the doctor with it. You're sick, there's something wrong with you. Or it may be a belief about yourself, or I'm sick because I have some symptom, and so I must be sick. And this is, there's a psychological component. There's a belief system involved with that. Instead, a health model is so transitioning from a disease focus to a health focus. In other words, you come to the doctor, and the doctor's response, instead of saying or thinking, oh, you're sick, there's something wrong with you, so we need to prescribe you maybe this medicine or this procedure. Instead, the thought process is, you're well. Okay, you're well, but you're a little bit out of balance. There's a dis-ease, right? Literally a dis-ease, which means you're not at ease. You're away from ease. And so we need to bring you back to ease again. And there needs to be I guess the answer is that it's become too much of an industry, the medical industry. It's become a medical industry, and the nature of industry is it's a profit-driven motive. And that's hard to reconcile when we're talking about medicine, because the purpose of medicine is healing. And if you go back even less than 100 years ago, doctors didn't believe that they could heal someone. That wasn't part of it. They believed that the healing occurs from God or some greater power. Maybe you're not religious, you don't identify with the idea of God, but the idea that there's an energy, there's a life force that exists. And so the healing is coming from that. If you're out of alignment with that, you need to be brought back to. So what a doctor does is it helps to facilitate the realignment of the patient into balance when they're out of balance. We have to stop thinking of ourselves as being ill or being sick. We have to understand that there's health and there's absence of health. There's wellness and there's absence of wellness. And so, we need to move towards the embracing the idea that we are already healthy. And that goes a really long way. When you see yourself as healthy, when you feel yourself as healthy, you are healthy. The mind is tremendously powerful. It's tremendously powerful, and it impacts the way that we experience life.
It's a great perspective, Steve, to look at it from an angle of absence of, as opposed to being broken or ill, that sort of negative focus or connotation. Because you're totally right, because someone could be one day perfectly well, and for whatever reason, the following day become totally ill. And it's about being either on course or off course. So I love that perspective of the absence of, and it's the possibility, therefore, the potential to then be on the road and on the journey back to full health, which really has been the essence of this chat and topic. Is physical education is salvation. And I feel that we've covered some really good ground here. And of course, we can have numerous other conversations. I'd love to bring you back onto the Purpose-Driven Movement podcast, because you've got so much to give. And every time we've met, had conversations, it's always been enriching. And I hope that the listeners have gained some valuable insights here. And, we're always like looking at how can we think bigger rather than think small. It's so easy in our industry, call it, to really think small. My way is the best way, my method, right? But to actually expand outside of ourselves and reach out to the tentacles of other great minds and bodies. And I love the idea of the power of the breath really being the power of the spirit, because that is my own personal belief system, that life is breathed in. So when we breathe in, we receive. When we breathe out, we give. It's a receiving and giving essence of inspired. So all of this is really music to my ears, and hopefully the listeners have sort of maybe shifted in their thinking, even that slight little bit. And so again, for those in the show notes, you can get links to Steve Cotter, International Kettlebell Fitness Federation, IKFF, and follow Steve Cotter on Instagram as well. So Steve, I know, gives a lot, and you'll see some great physical skills that Steve goes through as well with his rolling jiu-jitsu and kettlebells, and I'm always admiring those videos. So you can follow Steve there. And once again, really appreciate you, Steve, for giving your time on the other side of the world, as we say, from where I am. And you could say much the same. But again, in the true spirit of it, really grateful for having you, and we'll catch up with you sometime soon.
Thank you so much, Tarek. Good to see you, my friend.
From the bottom of our heart, thank you for being a part of our podcast community. We work hard to create content that we hope you enjoy and find valuable. If you haven't already, we would be honored if you would consider subscribing and following us on your favorite platform. That way, you'll never miss an episode, and you'll always be the first to know when new episodes are released. We truly appreciate your support, and we can't wait to continue to grow and connect with you through our podcast.